Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. We're here every week to deliver news and insights on trends and really the power of trends and how to use them to map out inside your business, do scenario planning, and really tackle all the major problems by putting your canoe in the fast flowing river rather than the swamp of things not changing very often. And I want to start off today, Adam, with the discussion that's been sort of part of our discussion since the beginning of our podcast. And that, of course, is this whole concept of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all that. And I know you've been an opponent for a long time. So I'd like to start off with first sort of talking about the backdrop of why it exists and why it's not or shouldn't exist going forward. So let's start there.
So cryptocurrencies got their start around 2010, 2011, and we're not exactly sure who started Bitcoin, but it started off as a sort of a white paper to say that you could create a new currency that would be independent of all nations. And the benefit of that would be you could do transactions without having to use dollars or yen or euros or British pounds. And that the benefit of that would be that it wouldn't track. They predicted that there would be no such thing as inflation in cryptocurrencies because there was no Federal Reserve that could issue more. The only way you could get additional coins was to go through the process, the mathematical process to create a new token. So it would get rid of inflation. It would somehow be much better for the economy because you'd have this one mega currency and you wouldn't have to go through currency transactions. So that all started around 2010, 2011. I first wrote about it in 2018, and my whole reaction to it was I couldn't believe that it had blown up and become as large as it had, that I couldn't see any need for it. That everything worked really well as it was. There wasn't a need to hide transactions unless you were doing something illegal. The fact that currencies were managed was a good thing. The Bretton Woods Agreement of the 1960s, in which we pegged currencies against each other rather than gold, had been a very good thing for all international economies that allowed for global economic growth. And there were all these advantages of the current monetary system, and that Bitcoin didn't add anything to the game. Now, I wrote this up in Forbes, and Forbes at the time was owned by a Singaporean company, and they got so upset that I wrote that column that they had the editor come down on me with both feet. And I went back to him and said, look, there's something wrong here, because that column I wrote isn't any more controversial than when I said Steve
Ballmer.
Steve Ballmer was worst CEO in America. I said, so there's something here behind this. And to this day, I do believe that an awful lot of what's happened in crypto has been driven by the Chinese. I believe the Chinese-Singapore alliance in there has driven a lot of the activity towards this. And I think that after several years of watching it, I think more of this is about how to try to upset the currency market as it exists and try to create confusion and chaos in currency markets with these coins. But besides that, I said, look, it's just a risk game. Why would it's like buying a pet rock, or why would you want to buy one of these coins? Well, what happened during the pandemic was an explosion of risk assets, and for some reason that I still don't understand, investors moved out of buying Bitcoin and started buying all kinds of other coins like Dogecoin, and there was a lot of them that came out.
Yeah, Ethereum and whatnot.
Yeah, and again, it's never made any sense to me. I couldn't figure out why people do it. Well, finally, FTX went under, and Sam Bankman-Fried is now most likely going to go to prison for moving money around between accounts, which is exactly what I predicted in my columns in 2018. Was that because it was unregulated and because there's not sufficient security control over it, you would start finding people manipulating it and people taking advantage of the situation. And so at that time, we caught last year, Bankman-Fried was moving these Bitcoin valuations out of the bank or out of the coin exchange and putting them into private investments, mixing up the coins. And he got arrested. FTX got shut down. Well, the next move was, okay, who's going to take it over? And they looked at Binance and Coinbase as being the two that would take over. And now Coinbase and Binance are under investigation by the SEC for the same thing that FTX did.
We talked about this, what was it, almost a year ago, wasn't it?
Yes. And again, I've just said to people, look, this is highly speculative. I wouldn't play in this game. You're a very good chance of losing all your money. And I can't see where the benefit is, the payout is. And, don't do any of this, especially if you're not doing Bitcoin. It's nothing but buying a piece of air, hoping that somebody else will come along.
Right. I think I told you about this. Maybe I mentioned this in one of our previous podcasts that, my children play a lot of these online games. And
Hmm.
there's one particular thing that you can do and you can sell these things called V-Bucks. So you use real money, my money, to go buy this imaginary money so that you can use the imaginary money inside the game to buy different skins and different things for your characters. It's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole point is once they get your real dollars, then they can do something with the real dollars. Well, you're sitting here holding these imaginary, whatever you want to call them, things. In that case, try to get your dollars back. You're not going to get them. They're going to say spend it in the game, right? And so that's where the money's going to go. And that's what's been happening all along with these cryptocurrencies. I just want to kind of come back on this. Like, let's realize who runs Binance. It's a guy named Chengding Zhao. He's a Chinese guy, right? And Binance is not a U.S. company. It is a Chinese company. And so Chinese run company. And we don't have any reason to believe that this guy is somehow, the next prime minister of anything, or that he has, the knowledge of how to run an international monetary fund. There's no background on this guy that indicates that at all. It indicates this guy was somebody who happened to be Chinese and happened to get invested early and create one of these coin bank locations, where you could store your cryptocurrencies. And what he's been doing with it is commingling it, effectively stealing it, like you said, and finding other uses for it. And now he's being investigated. The other one is a more U.S. company. That's Coinbase. And I just want to make sure our people out there know that the founder of Coinbase is a guy named Brian Armstrong, who is 40 years old. By the way, Sam Brinkman-Fried's 31. Yeah, that wealth of knowledge in that young mind, right? Brian Armstrong worked at Airbnb when he got out of school, and what he claims is that he saw that it was very difficult for people to make transactions from foreign countries. Like, I'm going to go from Argentina to stay in France, or I'm going to go from Spain to stay in Japan. He said it was difficult to deal with the currencies. He read a paper on Bitcoin, became an enthusiast, and decided he would found Coinbase, right? That's the origin of the company. His COO is a person named Emily Chow. Emily Chow is president and COO. Now, get this as her background. She's 43. She went to the Wharton Business School, came out of the Wharton Business School and worked in business development for LinkedIn, then worked in business development for Yahoo. Oh, that's a wonderful company to have on your resume, right? Then she went to Warner Media, where she was head of business development, a media company. And then she becomes the COO of what's effectively the JP Morgan Chase and maybe partly Federal Reserve
Yeah.
of the cryptocurrency world. 43, and that's her background. There's no history here of financial services, no history of banking, no history of lending, no history of dealing with currencies. It's just, and I want to come back. These people are creating something out of air that they're trying to convince people to participate in. And the SEC has stepped in and said, look, this is an attempt to have a security. You're trying to have an unregulated security, and we're not going to let that happen in the United States.
Yeah.
So now these two companies are being looked at very closely. I imagine just like FTX, they're going to get shut down. You're not going to have a bank in which to keep your coins. What are you going to do with those Bitcoins? So, again, my point of view is, hey, it's high risk to hold on to that asset. You ought to be getting out of it.
Yeah, and I think these people you mentioned, I mean, if they're anything, they're brilliant. They're brilliant in the sense of just like you mentioned she worked for Warner Media. This is basically an act, right? It's a play, and I've been sort of, I think, from the beginning more on the fence, or just at least non-committal on the whole idea of cryptocurrency. But now, as things are starting to come out of the woodwork, it's clear that they're brilliant charlatans, and they've really done a lot of disrespect to, I think, the markets. The only winners in this whole game are them, and
Yes.
and others that might be lucky enough to have bought and sold at the right time, and everybody else are the losers.
Yes. And eventually this will crumble like a house of cards. It will disappear. And if you are holding any of those coins, you're not going to be able to do anything with them. I'm telling you, if anybody wants to hire Spark Partners or you and I, Manny, I wouldn't take Bitcoin in payment. It wouldn't even occur to me to allow that to happen. I want to have dollars, or I want to have a currency I can convert into dollars quite easily. So I just want to bring people up to speed. This is something we've talked about for a long time. We've been out in front of this issue. We've been telling people to be speculative, that it's high risk. You shouldn't be in there. And that's the kind of work we do at Spark Partners, is trying to be ahead of the game and helping people understand where they ought to make their investments and not make their investments. And what we see is that it's taken a few years, but the reality is that this is not a place you want to be.
Yeah, and actually that's a good segue because the whole topic of media here and the whole framework. Another company that we spoke about a year and a half ago, of course, is CNN, and they made some moves that we talked about that weren't the right moves, and now they're paying the price. You want to talk about the recent firing of their CEO?
Yes. So it was a year ago that we talked about CNN being taken over by Discovery Warner Media, and at the time I was very, very negative on the situation. And what happened was they fired the previous CEO had been fired just towards the end of the company as it was being acquired, just shortly before that. So they replaced the CEO. Well, that was going to happen because the last guy left. And the guy who came in was a guy named Chris Licht, I believe, Licht. I believe you pronounce it Licht. It could be Licht. But anyway, he got fired this week. And the reason he got fired is because revenues are down, ratings are down, things have gone badly. And what I want to do is point out that when he took the job, working for a guy named David Zaslav, who's 63, and Lick, by the way, is 51. When they took this over, I said at the time this was bad news. That Discovery Warner Media, all the decisions they were making at the time portended things would go poorly. That the scenario planning we could project for them indicated it would play out better for competitors. And so what happened? Well, Licht came in, and the first thing he did was he and Zaslav shut down CNN Plus. He shut down CNN online business. They put $100 million into that. And I look at that and I'm like, okay, right off the get-go, dumbest move you could make. Here you had this nice white space process. You've set this project up. It's set up to succeed. It's got a ways to go to figure out how it's going to get monetized, but you've got a lot of content there. You've got a lot of people work for CNN invested. You got a great staff. And the first thing you do when you take over CNN is you shut down the bright, shining light for the future. That I couldn't have imagined a dumber move. It was going to be, not only was it bad strategically, it was going to be demotivating to the organization. It shut off a potential revenue stream of people that would want to place online ads, possibly in conjunction with traditional media ads. There was all these things going for it, and they decided just to shut it down to save money. And I said that right off the get-go. I said that's really going to be stupid.
Yeah, you can't save yourself to success, right?
Exactly. And especially when you're in this war with other news agencies like Fox News and Newsmax and MSNBC, and you're out there, Bloomberg, and you're trying to make sure that you're very, very competitive, they were clearly not going in the right direction. Well, what happened after that was a bunch of dumb stuff. Like you had the guys that were on the late night. You'd lost Chris Cuomo, who had one of the highest ratings in late night. Why? Well, because he was caught red-handed helping his brother, who was the governor of New York, in the media world, and that was certainly against principle, if not against the law. So he's gone. Now your late night lineup is in trouble. What they do, they move Don Lemon out of late night. So he was your good number two becoming your number one. They take him and slap him into a morning show, which is something he'd never done. You sit there and say, what? That doesn't make any sense. So you look at two things that happened here, and you say both of them didn't make any sense. But how could we predict that, and how could we look at our scenarios and expect things to go poorly? Well, David Zaslav had started his career in NBC in 1989. Okay, he had at NBC. What he basically did was he bought at NBC Universal. He bought other networks, and he made NBC Universal bigger by buying other networks. Well, then he took over as CEO of Discovery in 2006, where he continued to add other channels. But one of the biggest things he did was he started trying to look around for how to control costs. So then in 2021, when he took over Warner Media, okay, this is before they took on CNN. His prime objective been to cut costs, and he started whacking things in order to take tax write-offs. He said, including there was like 50 projects that were almost complete at HBO Max that he just stopped and said, okay, we're just not even going to bother to finish those. So what we see here is a guy who over years he's gone from trying to be a growth builder by acquiring channels to saying, okay, we've got enough channels, the world is changing. But instead of investing in online, he starts cutting costs. So what does he do when he gets to CNN? He immediately starts to cut costs. Mm-hmm. Who's there? Okay, he puts him as the new president, this guy named Licht. Well, what was Licht's background? He'd started out working for affiliates, meaning he was in local markets, like Los Angeles. But then he started to become a producer. And what did he do? He did morning shows. Right, and he was famous for having brought on Scarborough with his new show. He changed Good Morning America. So what does he want to do? He's going to start fiddling around as if he's going to change the format at CNN into something that's more like Good Morning America, and that's going to suddenly make the station a lot better. He grabs a late night guy who was once a reporter, became a late night commentator, tries to slip him in with a couple of other people into a morning show. Like somehow this is going to become GMA, which made no sense to anybody. The chemistry wasn't there, and they end up firing the guy who had been your number two, then became number one for late night. You fire him because he doesn't work out on the morning show. So now, what have you done? You've continued, you've just demotivated all your staff. You got people like Jake Tapper, people that have some power. Anderson Cooper, and they're just walking around like shaking their heads like, this is the dumbest stuff we've ever seen. This guy shouldn't be running the show. So he gets fired. So was it predictable? Absolutely, it was predictable.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that predictability. I think a lot of our viewers and some of our clients, when we first start working with them, they struggle with that idea that it's not that we're looking into a crystal ball, right? It's that we're following the trends.
Yes.
So it's important for, I think, our listeners to understand how that works.
Yes. What we can do is we look at the people running the organization, we look at the history of what they've done, we look at the behaviors they've undertaken, and we start to say, what are they likely to do next? And simultaneously, what's happening in the industry. So we know, and I've been commenting for nearly a decade on the demise of the network channels, right? The NBC, CBS, ABC, NPR, those channels are doing more poorly every year. Why? Because of the rise of streaming. So you've got all these additional channels you can use streaming, but it's really the streaming like the Netflix style streaming. People are going out and getting things off YouTube. They're watching these programs when they want to watch the program. So that's your Disney Plus, right? Yeah. That's your CBS Plus. So when you come along and you see something like CNN and somebody says, I want to close my CNN Plus, there's like, my gosh, you're walking 180 degrees in the wrong direction from the trend. So any president who the first move he does is say, I'm going to put all of my eggs in the traditional basket and shut down the white space, shut down the forward-looking part of the organization, then we, as people looking at it from the outside, can say, okay, this is not going to go well. Even if you want to give the guy a break and give him some time, that's the worst decision. It's the worst first step you could take. And it forebodes that things are probably going to get way worse. And so Zaslav is making cost-cutting decisions. It includes shutting down the future. So now I got a bad attitude about the head of the organization, the chairman CEO Zaslav. But then he puts this guy in place. The guy in place undertakes that action instead of fighting back and saying, no, let me set this up. Let me see how I can run it. Let's generate new revenues. He follows what his boss told him to do. And then the next thing he does is he tries to go after recreating Good Morning America on CNN. What we're seeing is people play out their past. They're running off their old game book in a world like media where it's changing really fast and the old game book isn't working at all. The NBC Universals are in big trouble. And so now Warner Media is a big company. Discovery Warner Media is big, but the leadership here is still trying to play the old game. We called it a year ago saying this was going to go bad for CNN. I think it's going to continue to go badly for CNN until they really put somebody entirely different in charge of the whole organization, somebody that can understand what's really happening. We saw the bad play out that happened at Disney. When the head of the amusement parks took over Disney 5 years ago, at first I said, this is a bad sign, bad sign, because amusement parks are not the wave of the future. People are getting entertained in different ways. But on my surprise, he walked into the job and said, no, I'm not going to reinvest in amusement parks. During the pandemic, we'll shut them down. And he became the big push for Disney Plus. Like, get all these people in line, get them signed up, become competitive with Netflix, get all that content out of the archive. Let's make this all happen. And it really takes the organization of Disney and starts to move fast in the right direction. Costs him a little bit of money, but hey, he's going in the right direction. That's the most important thing. What happens is this year, along comes, they bring Bob Iger back. First thing he does, fire this guy, takes all the money out of Disney Plus, which is the biggest threat to Netflix. Disney stock crashes. Netflix stock skyrockets. And we start seeing that the people, they're going back and grabbing gray hairs, putting people in these jobs that are not looking forward. They're looking backward. They're trying to manage for earnings rather than for growth. And as we know, and as you said earlier, this just doesn't work. You don't save yourself to prosperity. And those are the scenarios that we can play out. So,
exactly.
So I think I want to turn to a third scenario we had this week.
Okay.
The PGA and LIV, LIV.
Yep.
What did you hear about that?
Well, the whole, there's controversy, there's the confusion, and there's finger pointing, and there's fear, and I mean, it's the gamut, right?
Yeah. And so what we know is that the Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund, run by the Saudi prince, who ordered the killing of Khashoggi, all right? And this is all known facts, right? This guy puts up a bunch of money and says, I want to create a new golf league that will compete with the PGA. And he goes around and he offers money. So he gives people like Phil Mickelson a couple $100 million, right? And Kepke. Now, what we're doing here now is he's saying rather than golf was the one sport where everybody paid for their own thing. Like a golfer, if you played in the PGA, you paid for your own hotel room. You paid for your transportation. You paid for, you actually had to pay your green fees when you entered the tournament, right? You had to do it. Then you had to play a round of golf, and then you had to make it through the cut, right? In the first 2 rounds. If you survived the cut, then you didn't get any money if you didn't survive the cut. You put all this money out to be in the tournament. You don't survive the cut, you don't get anything. Now what happens is you go on to the next 2 rounds, and depending upon how you place determines how much money you get, right? So you don't have, you're not paying a salary. You're not getting a salary, right? And you have to earn your way in. You have to either do extremely well in college and come out way on top of the amateurs, or you have to go through Q school, you have to go through the nationwide tour, or you have to win in Europe. You have to prove yourself to get into the NBA. I'm sorry, to get into the PGA to start with. And here comes these guys from the outside, and they say, "Oh, we got a bunch of money, and we're just going to pay players, and we're going to tell them they're going to get like $200 million, even if they don't win. Doesn't matter. We're going to shorten up the game. We're only going to play 3 times. There's no cut. Only 40 players get to play in a tournament, and they all have to be with us. They have to be basically, I'm going to call them employees, because you've just given them 100, 200 to 300, 400, $500 million. So if you don't think they're employees, then, well, they're certainly tied to them in a big way, right? And so we're only going to have these 40 guys are allowed to play. And then what we'll do is we'll determine the places that they'll get to play. Well, a lot of there were PGA players that took the money, and then there were some like Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods. Rory was offered between 300 and 500 million. He turns it down. Tiger Woods turns it down. They said, what's the point? This, golf is about winner. The winner gets the money. This is where we go. Well, a lot of people got upset. They don't like this Saudi money getting invested. And so consequently, there was a big war that went on, and we didn't quite know what was going to happen, but we do know the PGA said, look, you LIV guys, you can't play in the majors that we have. And, so we're getting 2 competing organizations, kind of like back in the old days when you had the NFL and the AFL, or you had the NBA and the American Basketball Association. If you remember, that wasn't all one big thing back then. These were separate leagues, right? And so we're headed down that road until this week. And this week, the PGA says, sorry, changed their mind. We're going to put this all together now. It's going to be one thing, including the European Tour. So it's going to be one thing. They didn't really describe what the one thing is.
So what's that going to mean for the game?
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm headed right now. It's kind of say, okay, so there was very poorly described, and we don't quite know what's going to happen next. They didn't say, like, the guys who didn't get 400 million, are they going to play with the guys who did? Are they going to get the 400 million? I mean, is somebody going to step up and pay them now to be part of this thing, or are they going to be expected to pay? And how many rounds of golf are going to be in a tournament? Because these guys had different rules about how many rounds of golf, and the payouts were different. By the way, the PGA had all the network affiliations like NBC, CBS to go on television. LIV didn't have that. LIV only television you could try to watch a LIV game on was the CW network, so they didn't have any distribution. So you got PGA with a game and the way it's played and distribution and payouts. And over here you got LIV, which has a different game that they're playing, different way that they're doing payouts, and they have no distribution. But now all of a sudden this is supposed to be one happy thing. And what I want to do is kind of go through how my scenario of what I think is likely to happen in this situation.
Map it out.
All right. So first of all, there's a lot of talk about whether there'll be the PGA had been under investigation for anti-competitive behavior. And so they thought, okay, this is just going to make it more anti-competitive, so the deal will never be approved. And first of all, I want to say that's just horse baloney. It'll go forward. And why do I say that? Is because there have been lawsuits filed in all sports, like against FIFA for monopolizing soccer. There was a 1970 lawsuit about the NBA and ABA getting together, which was resolved in 1976 with the combination of the two. They never really took it seriously. Football was the act of Congress was passed in 1966 that allowed the NFL and the AFL to become one national football league with 2 separate divisions in it. If they're going to go that far with NBA and the NFL, Congress and the Justice Department are not going to make a big deal about golfers, right? There's just not enough of them. It's just not going to happen. So first of all, this deal is going to go forward. That's the first prediction that I make. It's not going to get stopped. The second is that since the PGA has all of these rights, what they're going to do is they're going to say, look, let's kind of get back to what we're trying to do here. The PGA is a nonprofit. Well, the NBA is a nonprofit. The NFL is a nonprofit. FIFA is a nonprofit. All these are nonprofit organizations. But the people who run them make millions of dollars. You know, the head of baseball makes millions of dollars. The head of football makes millions of dollars. So the people who work in these organizations, they make millions of dollars. And of course, the owners of the teams make millions of dollars. And the players make millions of dollars, right? So the fact that it's a nonprofit doesn't mean that there aren't millions of dollars here. PGA ratings have been going down for 4 years. There's a lot of explanations for that people can reach out to and blame it on the pandemic. But we do know that the interest in golf has declined. And people have said ever since Tiger Woods left the game, it just hasn't been a magnetic personality at the top. But the reality is, as I said, the ratings have been going down. So what I think we see here is the PGA saying that this fight between the two organizations, can we keep our NBC, CBS contracts in place, or do we have to get these other guys back in the game? Do we have to be able to get Phil Mickelson and Koepke and Johnson and these guys back in there so that we get people to watch? And so I think the first thing you're going to see is all these guys are going to be playing together, and all these guys are going to be back on the networks again. And so the contract will go out. Now, the organization itself isn't even named yet, but they've already said that the head of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the governor, the top guy of the wealth fund, working for the prince, his name is Yasser El Ramayan, is going to be chairman of the organization. That's already been said. So now we know who's running this deal. It's not the PGA. The guy running this deal is the guy who runs LIV. Yes. And so the LIV guy is going to take over. Now we can start to project. We say, okay, what's likely to happen with this guy? Well, this isn't the first time that the Sovereign Wealth Fund has invested in sports. They bought the Newcastle United Premier League club in the UK, right? They bought that in sports. And then they went out and paid a bunch of money to get a really high-ranking player named Karim Benzema to play for the Saudi Arabian team. So we see they're going to start to recruit. They're going to start to pull people into the game. They offered $20 billion in 2017 to buy Formula One from Liberty Media. And Liberty Media turned that down. So subsequently, they took Aramco, Saudi Arabian American company, oil company. They now pay $450 million a year promoting Formula One. So what can we project again? The Sovereign Wealth Fund is going to put a lot of money into promoting golf. And they're going to try to promote it the way that they want to promote it.
Well, what's interesting about what they're doing, Adam, and maybe we can talk about this a bit as well, is the Saudis aren't. I mean, they're smart. They're diversifying away from oil. They see that we passed peak oil, and they're going into where, I mean, maybe golf isn't the right place, but maybe they can wield a lot of their money to sort of reinvigorate the sport. I mean, it's interesting to watch from the sidelines.
Well, last year, the NBA actually changed its rules to allow offshore and sovereign wealth funds to buy NBA teams. They changed the rules to make that happen. So they're anticipating that the Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund is very likely to want to buy an NBA team. We know that Phil Knight, the guy who founded Nike or made Nike into what it is today, has offered $2 billion to buy the Portland Trail Blazers. If that comes on the market, we can anticipate that there'll be a competitive offer from these guys at the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They're also paid $100 million to host 2 boxing matches for the Boxing Association since 2019. They've paid the World Wrestling Group, WWE, they paid them $1 billion for a 10-year deal where they are promoting WWE, and they get to have 2 events a year located in Saudi Arabia. And in esports, which you know is my favorite thing to watch because it's the up-and-coming sport, they paid $1 billion to buy ESL Gaming. And for people out there who don't know, ESL Gaming was a German company that's the number one in terms of holding competitions. So the number one company for holding esports competitions, which we've talked about at the Luxor and places where people go compete to win these prizes and all that, is ESL. Saudi Arabia paid $1 billion to get them. They also paid $500 million to buy a company called Faceit, What does Faceit do? It administers esports leagues. So if you're in one of these leagues where you play one of these games to try to be the champion of a certain esport, that's run by Faceit, okay? And so, for example, they then rank the players in each game, and they rank the players that are inside overall. The number one player in the ESL Faceit organization, the number one across the games, is named Monesy, Monesy. Okay, these are all acronyms, right? But the guy's known. You can look him up. And he's 18 years old. He was recruited into the esports at age 14. He now has a net worth of $600 million. Yes, 18 years old, has created a net worth of $600 million playing esports. So those of you that are pushing your kids to get your heads hammered as quarterbacks in the NFL, keep in mind this kid's 18 and he's worth as much as Tom Brady, and he doesn't even have any ad exposure yet, all right? But these are all the things that Saudi Arabia has done, the Saudi Arabian Wealth Fund. That's what they've invested in. They now have control of what we used to call the PGA, whether it's called PGA or LIV. It'll probably be called PGA because I want to stay a nonprofit, but LIV will be part of it. Now, how will this likely change the sport? Well, first of all, I think what we're going to see is the sport's going to move away and it's going to become more like the NBA and other sports, and that people are going to get paid a salary. Phil Mickelson will pay you $200 million to play. Tiger Woods is going to pay you $400 million. So you're going to be a salaried employee. I think that's one of the first things that we're going to see happen, is that it's not going to be you pay your own way. It's going to be a guaranteed sort of a deal. The second thing is there's likely to be purses like in boxing. So we'll say, okay, Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson or Bruce Koepke, you're getting paid $100 million, but you can't play in every tournament. So here's what we'll do. The winner of this tournament's coming up. This winner is going to get $10 million. This winner is going to get $5 million to try to induce people who are players to play the game. So we can start to see how the money will change hands and be differently. It'll be a lot more, though, like what we see in the NBA, and that the control, the money will come in to the PGA, and the PGA will have these players, and the players will be more like boxers, right? They might be independent, but they're not that independent, right? The events are all going to be sponsored. The events are all going to be paid for. The purses will be up front. So when, like, for example, Floyd Mayweather a few years ago, when he said he'd retired, and then they said, we're going to bring him back. And there was this big match where he was going to fight a guy, where he fought a guy who was a WWE top guy. They paid him something like, I think it was $150 million to do that one fight, right? To bring him out of retirement. Why? To excite boxing. And I remember when that happened, I was in Las Vegas and we were watching all the private jets come in and land at the Henderson Airfield for that event that night. And then after it was over, we watched them fly back out again, back to LA and all the places where the people came from. So I think we're pretty clearly, we can start to see where this is going. So if your kid, now, what does that matter? Well, it means that in the old days, if you had a child and they wanted to be a golfer, that was expensive. A lot of people couldn't afford to have their child be a golf player because, you got to buy the balls, you got to buy the equipment. School doesn't buy that for you.
And then the green fees, of course.
Yeah, you got green fees. And if you want to practice, you've got to pay for driving range fees. You got to pay, if you're going to be on a course, you got the green fees. So, golf had kind of been a sport of the wealthy. Now, I wouldn't say wealthy, but it's middle class. It's certainly, the number of people who are poor that can play in the game is a lot less. Well, I think we can start to see that change now because we start to say, oh, okay, this is headed towards bigger purses. So we're likely to see the game change at the level of high school and college. People are likely to say, okay, we'll start to support this sport. So we will donate clubs, we will donate balls, we will donate tee times, we will donate these things to school teams, to amateur leagues in order for people to play. Second, they will have a minor league they'll start to develop. And today we call it Q School. It's called the nationwide tournament. But what we'll say is here's the route that you go to professional sports. So in the NFL, you go to high school, to college, to the NFL. Basketball is high school, maybe college, and NBA. Baseball is usually high school and then into the minor leagues, right? And you go up through the minor leagues that you play. We'll probably start to see that happening in golf. They'll start going to high school kids and saying, okay, you have a choice. What you want to do, go to college, and that's okay. And you might win a scholarship, and that's okay. But if you'd like to, go the pro route, what will happen is, we'll recruit you into the minor leagues. Now, we do this also in basketball. A lot of people don't pay that much attention, but if you're not, a top performer in basketball when you graduate high school or you're in college, you go play in Europe. You play in the Italian league, right?
Right.
And so we have a lot of players that don't quite make it to the NBA. They get told spend a couple 3 years in Europe. Maybe you can get into professional NBA. And so that is already happening in the NBA. By the way, one of the reasons we see a lot of people with European names, people from Poland and other Eastern European countries in the NBA, is they come through that program. They come through that European program. Well, the European golf program is not going to be part of this PGA live deal. And so consequently, I think that's going to become the minor leagues that we'll see for the people that are in golf.
Wow.
I think on top of that, we're going to see a lot more effort at promotion. So these guys have money. They're going to go out and they're going to start picking people, and they're going to say, okay, Tiger Woods is old, Mickelson's old. We got to get young comers, and they're going to pick players, and they're going to do just like we did to Michael Jordan, just like we've done to all the famous football players and the famous basketball players. They're going to become celebrities, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to start seeing the PGA will promote them. They'll put money down. They'll promote them. They'll start saying these are people that you need to pay attention to, and they're going to push them to play well. They're going to, just like we do with boxers and other professional athletes. I think that the nature of the game will change. Right now, it's 4 days of golf in order to get to the end. If people get bored with it, I think they're going to do. Live has already shortened it to 3. They're likely to shorten it to 2. I can also say that when the Super Bowl happened about 4 years ago, they always play the Waste Management Tour. It's in Phoenix, I think. Yeah. The Waste Management Tour is playing on the same day as the Super Bowl in Phoenix. So they have the last day there. And you have these stands, people screaming and yelling as people play this par 9, and people are yelling and they're drunk. And, it's much more like an NFL game than it's like a normal, shh, we're quiet playing golf kind of a situation. We're going to see a lot more push in that direction, right? We'll start to see that, okay, we're going to bring these people in. We're going to create these games to be exciting. After that, about 4 years ago, after that game ended, they actually did a competition where Phil Mickelson and Tiger Woods played each other in a game where they just went to a course in Nevada, so it was legal, and they could bet while they were playing the 18 holes. So they had 2 pros playing side by side. That was as watched as the Waste Management tournament.
Wow.
People got all excited out of watching that. And so I think that's what we're going to start seeing a lot more of. It's going to be like, okay, to get you excited in golf, we're going to pick these, Johnson and Koepka, and we're going to put them out in Vegas or someplace else where it's legal. And we're going to go say, play against each other. We want to see who comes out the best. Watch them bet $100,000 a hole against each other. Maybe put skins on holes, like you win this hole, you win 100,000, you win that hole, you win 200,000, carry the skin forward. If there's tied for 4 holes, the guy who wins the 5th one wins all the money for the 4 in front of him. These are all the gambling type tricks and everything that those of us who play golf know about. A lot of people don't follow golf, don't know about it, but you start putting that on television with names that are promoted and you run ads for it.
It's going to change the game for sure. So it's exciting news.
Absolutely. So we're shortening up the game. We're going to have more of these one-on-one competitions. They'll start changing the courses. It'll be a lot more about how far can you hit the ball. Today, long drive competitions already exist. And so we're seeing golf, the same thing we do in baseball with home run derbies, the same thing we see in basketball with dunking competitions, right? We'll start saying, okay, you guys that play golf, who's got the longest drive?
Yeah.
And so they'll promote that. As a result, we'll start seeing golf courses will have to be much longer than the amateurs. Today, amateurs can go play on the same course. Pebble Beach, it's the same one. Pebble Beach that the pros do. It'll get to the point you can't really do that the pros are all driving the ball 375 yards, and that's going to have to be your opening shot. If you can't hit it that far, you won't be able to play. So they'll have to have a different course for the amateurs than they do for the pros. But they'll go on that. And then shows like The Big Break. Have you ever heard of that? It's where these amateurs go on the Golf Channel, and they have them do all kinds of quirky shots. Like, okay, they put a glass pane out 50 yards, a 14-inch square glass pane 50 yards out. And they say, hit a ball until you hit the glass pane and knock it out. Or they put a 20-foot wall 10 foot in front of them and say, you got to hit the ball over this 20-foot wall and make it land on a green on the other side that you can't see. Quirky, weird shit like that goes on this show, The Big Break. But the idea is you win the Big Break and you get to go to Q school, you get to go to the Nationwide, and you get to become a pro. And so they're going to see more of that stuff where people will say, okay, how do I get into this? If I didn't play high school golf, but I want to get into the game, then I can go on the Big Break. And but not just one Big Break. There'll be a lot more of them. It'll become part of the game. It'll become part of the
This is all stuff that we're going to definitely watch out for in the next coming year and a half, 2 years down the road as we start to do these podcasts. We'll have to have another one in a year from now and reflect back on today and see how we did.
That's right. We'll have to see how we did. But this is the process that we used when we talked earlier about crypto, when we talked earlier about CNN, and it gives a chance for people to see the process real time as I'm putting forward some predictions about what we're going to see happening in professional golf.
Very well said, Adam. And with that, we'll end for today. And if you have any thoughts, questions, you want to reach out to Adam and I, you can always reach us at our email addresses, manny@sparkpartners.com and adam@sparkpartners.com. We're here to help you to understand in your market where your trends are and how to use them. We help to look at the competition, and we do this exercise, but with you in your specific market. Very, very powerful.
Thanks a lot, Manny.
All right. Take care. Cheers.